Welcome back to the PricePlow Podcast. Today we're really excited to get back on with Glanbia Nutritionals. Brad Meyers, VP in Functional Proteins and Snacking. Was I right about that?
Yeah.
Really excited today to keep talking about functional proteins and especially like foods and functional foods. So today we're going to be talking a lot about, like I said, functional proteins, but how they come to be created and the innovation behind it from Glanbia. So Brad, thanks so much for joining us. Could we start with an introduction on yourself and how you got to Glanbia?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks so much, Ben. And pleasure to be here. Mike as well. Thanks for the opportunity. So I've been with Glanbia about 10 years. I've spent a little over 20 years in the food ingredients industry, primarily focusing on specialty ingredients that have a different functionality. Prior to working in proteins, I worked in natural ingredients, I worked in sweeteners, so a pretty broad, scope as far as not just the ingredients, but the end use applications those ingredients would go into. Although I'm a little bit more on the business side, I would say in my current role, my training is actually in food science. So both of my degrees are in food science. I started my career in a beverage lab, making different beverages and trying to reduce the sugar with different sweetener combinations. So definitely understand the scientific aspect of it, as well as a lot of the insights data and the stuff James's team would be working on as far as consumer trends, end use markets, all that good stuff.
While we're talking about background, I think that a lot of people that listen to this podcast who aren't in the industry might be curious about, like, where did you go to school for food science and how did you get into that? Because working in protein bars and the growing functional, that's an interesting topic.
No, absolutely. And it's funny you say that. I was having a conversation earlier today, actually, with someone in my company about kind of my background. And what I said to her is I got into food science entirely by accident. I didn't even know it existed either. I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign. I'm based in Chicago, grew up in Chicago, so that would be the state school here. Happens to be one of the best food science programs in the country, but everywhere else I applied, I was a science and math kid, so I applied for a lot of straight sciences, and like any 18-year-old, I had no idea what I wanted or what I was getting into, but I thought biochemistry sounded cool, so that's mostly what I applied for. But just because of the intricacies of how the University of Illinois works, and you apply to a college, not the entire university, I had a better shot getting in through the ag school versus going in through LAS, where biochem is. So I wound up applying through the food science program. Now I've always been kind of a foodie and interested in cooking. I mean, even when I was a teenager. So that did intrigue me a little bit. But my intention was to kind of start in food science and then transfer to a straight science major. And I got into it and I loved it. It's basically like studying every straight scientific discipline: physics, engineering, chemistry, biology, microbiology, but specifically applying those to how they work in food. So, food chemistry, food engineering. And the other great thing, just to kind of plug food science, this is one of the things that really hooked me is, in a straight scientific field, to get really cutting edge real work, you kind of got to go all the way through to the PhD level. Whereas with just an undergrad degree in food science, you can get a really great job, which is what happened with me when I started with R&D. I then completed a master's while I was working there, so I do have a master's degree as well. But one of the professors early on mentioned that to me, and again, being 18, the thought of signing up for 9 years of school before I could get a job wasn't really that appealing. So that was another reason why I kind of was hooked into it, and it happened by accident, but really love the field and would definitely encourage younger folks out there to look into it. A lot of schools have really good food science programs.
I went to Rutgers. Sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to say, occasionally we get a clip where I'm like, man, I wish we could show this to younger people or high schoolers or something, because we see like where things can go now that we're older. And so I appreciate that clip so much. That's one of them where it's like, man, if only a lot of high schoolers can hear this, they might save themselves some trouble. Like the ones who would be interested in that would be very interested in that.
Absolutely.
So thank you. I appreciate that.
No, and with the food science degree, this is the other thing my colleague and I were talking about, because she's in marketing, but also has a food science background. Like, people go in so many different directions. You can go in engineering and be working in a production facility. You can be doing R&D on the bench. You could be doing basic ingredient research, you could be doing sales, you could be doing marketing. Like it has a lot of different legs, in terms of where you can take that degree.
I went to Rutgers for dietetics, and I had to have a couple of basic food science classes, and I mean, I loved it. You were understanding the science behind like the cooking that you were probably already doing, like actually understanding the reactions that are occurring, and then getting into like manufacturing is it's kind of like taking that to like the next level. How do you scale that, right? How do you create a lot of it? And that's really interesting.
I'm not sure where you want to begin. I think the big change, obviously, are the GLP-1 medications and how they're changing the diet. So would you say that's a good place to kind of start? Because we want to approach this from the market perspective. So how is the market changing over the last couple of years? How do you think it's going to continue to change? How do our listeners formulate products that will actually not just like only, work in this market, but sell and everything too? So
I mean, my take on that, and James will probably, likely add to this and have a little bit of a different view. But I view GLP-1 as like kind of pouring gasoline onto the fire versus being the root cause. I mean, there was a huge trend going into the pandemic of people switching from sort of what we would historically refer to as, sports nutrition, in the gym, building muscles, to kind of lifestyle nutrition. So maybe your weekend warriors, or even someone who's not really that interested in fitness and exercise, that's just trying to live a little bit more healthily. Now, when you look at the categories and what happened, and some of the key protein products like bars or ready to mix powders, whatever it might be, things got a little bit wonky during the pandemic. I mean, there was huge runway going into 2019 on those product categories, huge growth rates. And then because of all of the, obviously uncertainty in the world, you didn't have a lot of people out on the go. So something like a protein bar, you might be eating, on the train or in the car on the way to the office, like you're not going into the office anymore. So some of those categories kind of paused for a couple of years. And then there was also some consumer dynamics where folks were, trading down in different categories. I've got $20 to spend on a box of bars. That I can buy a lot more granola bars with that $20 than I can protein bars. So we saw private label taking off. We saw a lot of different dynamics. I would say probably about midway through 2023 is when we started seeing these categories kind of normalize, so to speak, to back to what they were doing leading up to the pandemic, where it was really the high protein segments of those categories that were driving the growth more than the traditional lower protein products. And then you've got GLP-1 taking off after that, which just supercharged everything because you've got a whole new consumer set, that's very interested in protein, as well as just more awareness, I would say, generally speaking, in terms of health and wellness. Then at the same time, the product technology has continued to improve, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this later, but these products just taste a lot better than they used to. And so especially, for that mass market lifestyle type of consumer, that matters. Someone who's just trying to get my however many 100 grams of protein, so I can meet my goals in the gym, you probably got a little bit more flexibility on, does it have to taste great? But for an everyday person that's just trying to make more healthy choices, like taste really matters. And the technology has just really improved, both from the ingredient side and the manufacturing, so that we can deliver that taste to the consumers.
I love that you're making that kind of comment at the end, because in a separate conversation, we've had a similar outcome when comparing sucralose and some more natural sweeteners when it comes to like maybe beverages or powders. And the answer comes out to like, people do like, natural or some sort of claim of like uniqueness or differentiation. But at the end of the day, all that matters, like if that's like number 3 on their list, number 1, which is still a huge distance away, is, does it taste good? It has to taste good, no matter what. Once it tastes good, then you can feel better about the decisions that you're making. But by far and large, tasting good is paramount to everything. And with the pushes and innovation in the category, it seems like it's starting to taste so good that it's going to become really accessible and demanded by mainstream people, even though it's a protein bar, Yeah,
100%. And it's interesting you referenced that now, as I mentioned, in the intro, I started my career in sweeteners, doing just that, looking at things like sucralose, aspartame, all these different tools we have. And this was the time that stevia was just starting to take off, I would say, early 2000s, early middle 2000s. And same data. then. It doesn't, and this is anecdotal to my career and my experience, but any product category I've ever been in, any ingredient I've ever been in, those types of consumer surveys, exactly what you said, Ben, taste is always number one, and it's way above anything else. And then you get into those other choices, whether it be clean label or higher protein or lower sugar, or whatever the metric might be, depending on the category. The only exception I've ever seen to that is in the supplements world. Sometimes if it doesn't taste bad, then the consumer might think, oh, well, the medicine isn't working. Mm-hmm. So that might be one carve out, but particularly in mainstream food and beverage, like taste has always been king.
Well, I think we can get stuck in this conversation talking about like ourselves here being like early adopter consumers or like more engaged consumers, where we might, because we understand the science, we might allow a little bit more in terms of poor flavor. But when we're trying to, when we're outside of our little bubble and we're talking with like billion-dollar brands, those brands are speaking to end consumers that most likely are not putting in a lot of hours at the gym. They might be doing spin classes. They're not like really super consumers. They're trying to get on grocery shelves to, the parents of the households and stuff, to like really get end consumer mainstream. And those people, I every single time I think they want it to taste good, Yeah,
100%. And I mean, I think, there's a kind of a trope, which certainly isn't mine, and I'm probably going to do a bad job of paraphrasing it, but your marketing dollars will get a consumer to try your product once, but it's taste that's going to get them to buy it a second and third and fourth time, right?
Absolutely. And it seems like it's just getting so easy. I mean, I've in the last year started to get into flavoring, like starting to understand the science behind it, and it almost seems formulaic. Like if the ingredients are not poor tasting, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of differentiation between flavorings between brands. You use Ace K and sucralose and some acid and some flavor, and you can blow people's faces off with some flavor. It's not like a proprietary thing anymore, it seems like.
Yeah, no, and there's definitely some really great technology out there, and some things that are still kind of cutting edge and differentiated. But I would agree with you, on the whole, that I think part of it also, though, is the technology to get it to deliver the right way. It's not just about flavor and taste, texture, mouthfeel. Like these are also really big, important components. And I know that scope of today wasn't to talk about sweeteners, but just to use that, if you pull out sugar is a great sweetener, but it also does a lot more than just sweeten. It provides body, it provides mouthfeel, it provides browning, it provides bulk if you're in a powder application. And the sweeteners you referenced, sucralose is 600 times sweeter than sugar, Ace K is 200 times sweeter than sugar. If you're pulling out, 200 parts sugar, only putting in 1 part Ace K, you got a lot of bulk to make up. And that's why if you take like a diet soda versus a regular soda, it's syrupy versus thin, and the consumer set's different. So I would say a diet soda consumers, they like the thin texture. A syrupy full sugar soda is going to taste weird to them. But, in some of these applications where we're trying to swap out one thing for another, like it's not always that simple.
I'm immediately reminded of like as a kid at the pool, you could tell when like the mixture of the syrup and the soda water at like the, you could tell back then when they were off. Yeah, we didn't have the Coca-Cola machines that perfectly mix things like back then. I always knew when they were like we're running low on syrup or something. Does that okay? So to bring it back to your job now with foods, how do those lessons like affect now? Like what kind of things did you learn?
Well, no, they're the same thing. Like if you want, it's kind of getting a little wonky into the food science, but if you think about like food engineering, you talk about mass balance, right? Mm-hmm. Like what goes in one end of the equipment, what comes out the other side. You can kind of think of a food formula the same way. So if you're trying to increase protein, you got to decrease something else, right? There's only 100%. So if you're putting 33% protein into a product that used to have 0 protein, 33% of something else is coming out. And it's the same thing with sugar reduction. If you're pulling that sugar out, something else has to go in.
So this is probably like one of my favorite things about, like I said, having food science credits in college was understanding when we got to foods now with functional foods, like what, like can you explain to people what is the role of sugar in food? What happens when you add whey protein to food? Like give us like a bait. Like we got to get some chemistry in here where we explain like these ingredients have effects on the chemical changes that are occurring during baking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of things sugar is going to do in, say, a baked good. There's two types of browning reactions that happen. If you'll remember, there's caramelization, which is like, making caramel, right? You heat up a sugar, it turns brown. There's also a reaction called the Maillard reaction. And that's where you have a reducing sugar. So it's a specific type of sugar. Sucrose would be a reducing sugar, but not every sugar is a reducing sugar. And you need to have an amino acid. And amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So basically, if you got a protein, you got a sugar. I'm definitely oversimplifying here, but those things will combine and also turn a product brown. And also, it's not just a color piece. There's a lot of flavor that gets developed from Maillard reactions. In some applications, like a baked good, you want Maillard browning. In other applications, you want to avoid it. So, have you ever had a protein bar that, wasn't coated in chocolate, and maybe it was 12, 14 months old, and you open it up and it wasn't white, it was brown? That's because you got protein and reducing sugars in there, and the Maillard reaction is happening. So,
what kind of food could you give an example of a food where you do want that reaction that people might be able to relate to?
Oh, yeah, a baked good. Like, again, it's not just caramelization. Like, you bake a muffin and it's got that really nice kind of brown, those cooked notes and that texture and that color. Like, you cook a steak, like you're getting Maillard browning happening there as well. So, it's not an all good or an all bad thing. It's just a chemical reaction that's going to happen in food. So if you change that chemical makeup, you pull some of the sugar out, again, as an example, there's this idea or this term called humectancy, which is like, moisture absorption. Is it going to be a moist product, or is it going to be kind of dry? So if you pull, just to use muffin as an example, if you pull sugar out of a muffin and you try to just replace it with any old fiber or protein, you're going to have like a really dry, crumbly muffin. So, you need to use the right cocktail of bulk sweeteners. And when I say that, I include fiber. But, there's things like sugar alcohols that are great ingredients. They're just not considered as natural or as healthy by a lot of consumers. Look, I want to make the distinction that all of these ingredients, whether it be something like sucralose or sorbitol, these are perfectly safe ingredients.
Got it.
So when we formulate around them, it's not because there's any concern around food safety. These have been studied, they've been validated, they're legal to use in food in the United States. But at the end of the day, the food industry is going to produce products that consumers want to buy. Mm-hmm. And if consumers are, concerned about something artificial on the label of a package or an ingredient they don't understand, the food industry is going to replace those with more natural sounding options or naturally sourced ingredients. So that's why there was kind of a sea change, I would say, maybe about 10 years ago, getting rid of some of these bulk sweeteners and sugar alcohols in a lot of products, your sorbitols, maltitols, and replacing them with either a more natural sounding, or I'm sorry, not more natural sounding, but a more naturally viewed ingredient like erythritol is viewed as more natural than sorbitol or maltitol, or using something like a soluble corn fiber or a chicory root fiber, that is more natural. Plus, you're going to have the benefit of added fiber in the finished product. But like I said before, those are going to function very differently in the different applications than sugar will. So it's not just as simple as I'm going to take out, 1 pound or 1 gram or whatever it is of sugar and put 1 pound or 1 gram of this other ingredient in there, and I'm going to have the same finished good.
Okay, this is super interesting. So getting back to before, you're talking about like consumer surveys and everything. Are there situations where what people say they want isn't exactly always what they're buying? Like, for instance, taste still dominates. So if I'm able to make something better tasting and better with a better texture with sorbitol, and I'd like to get a little bit more into that, but like with sorbitol instead of erythritol, do the like, at what point are you listening to what they're saying versus listening to what they're buying? And have you seen disconnect on any of that?
100%. I mean, I've seen a lot of it anecdotally through my career. I want to be clear, Mike, I don't work for a CPG company, so
Right.
those are my customers, right? We're an ingredient manufacturer and supplier. So at the end of the day, whether it's our ingredient or we're helping to design a formula that includes other products that we don't make, which we do a lot of as well. We design the finished food form, whatever it is, a bar, a protein cereal, a beverage, based on what our customer wants, which is a brand, and they're doing that based on what their consumers want, or to your point, what they think their consumers want. Empirically, what we've seen in a lot of the market data, again, I would go back to I go back to diet sodas. I'm not going to call out a specific brand, but the best-selling brands, they all still use aspartame, right? And if you Google aspartame, you're going to find that it supposedly gives you every possible disease ever known to man. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, it's the most heavily studied food ingredient in history, and there's no real credible science that says that it's really bad for you. There's some more interesting, more recent research on kind of how it impacts the gut microbiome and those pieces, and there is some other data that is relatively credible around that it will increase your cravings for sweet foods. So you may, because you consume aspartame or sucralose or one of these other sweeteners, you may then eat more sugar because you have more sweet cravings, and that could result in weight gain or some other negative health outcomes. But in any case, the consumer sentiment for artificial sweeteners is terrible. Meanwhile, there's a lot of diet soda that's being sold, all over the place, right? So we see that for sure. We've seen that in some of the categories that we play into, that some of the top-selling brands in some of these categories today have a little bit of a dirtier label, using some of those types of ingredients, sugar, alcohols, maybe the artificial sweeteners instead of the natural sweeteners like stevia. And at the end of the day, they're selling great because they taste great. So I would say, Mike, that's a great call out, and there's lots of examples to that. But as far as, specific data or statistics, that's something I think my colleague James could speak to a lot.
Yeah, and just for listeners know, James dropped off with a bad connection, and we haven't seen him back. But Brad, this is awesome. We're just gonna keep running with you, man. So I appreciate that. I'm not even sure where we want to go from here. So effectively,
I have a relevant question, if maybe if it's open. So we talked about what happens when you pull sugar, but I think like a sentiment that a lot of consumers have is we want more protein. We don't understand why these foods only have 4 to 8 grams of protein. Why can't we get 25 grams of protein like the scoop of protein that I drink every day? What happens when we add protein to a baked good?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I was going to pivot in that same direction, Ben. So, there's the idea of, less, and then there's the idea of fortification. So there's a couple things, like I said before, getting back to that mass balance topic. If you're going to add more of something in, you only have so much space. So you're going to have to pull something else out. Typically, and the reason I talked a lot about sugar reduction as well, just as an aside, beside the fact that I worked in sweeteners at the beginning part of my career, increasing protein and reducing sugar typically are going hand in hand now. Consumers want both of those things. They want more protein in their food and they want less sugar. Like I said, fiber is a very good tool to replace sugar and still provide that bulk. And also it comes along with it some really good health benefits, of course. And based on what I've read, American consumers particularly are not getting enough fiber in their diet. So, that is something that we definitely need to be consuming more of, not just protein. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of differences in terms of how a product behaves. If I use a couple examples, if we rewind 15, 20 years ago, where the state of the technology was, and again, I won't call out any specific brands by name, but if you had a protein bar 20 years ago, it was probably something you had to chew for about 20 minutes. It wasn't really a pleasant experience. It was just something you kind of muscled through to get your protein down. And now you have a protein bar and it tastes like a candy bar, and it's actually kind of a delightful experience to have one of these. So, what protein will do functionally in a product, a lot of different things. It will have a textural impact. It can change the moisture. A lot of these things will be a lot drier, I would say, whether it's a baked good or a bar. If you're putting a lot of protein in there, it'll be a lot chewier. One of the most common modes of failure in high protein bars is hardness. So if you take a protein bar straight off a line, it's really fresh and soft and great. And then if you don't use the right proteins in the formulation, as soon as 6 weeks, but it could be 6 months or 12 months later, the thing's as hard as a rock. And I've seen some protein bars I couldn't even cut with a steak knife. And that's not to say that they weren't made with high quality protein. They just weren't made with the right kind of protein. So the kind of protein you want to use in a tub, for ready to mix is different than the kind of protein you'd want to put in a bar. And that's, again, the chemistry of it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to provide a little bit of a different functionality, in an application. And you're going to have to process them a little bit different. The way, even though you might use the same equipment, the way that you'd manufacture a protein bar is probably going to be a little bit different than the way you manufacture a cereal bar in a lot of ways.
Awesome. Okay. Ben, did you want to keep going down that road? Effectively, we've talked about a few things. The customers that Glanbia is generally talking to, you are generally talking to the people who are going for that healthier route, not really just make it taste good at any under any circumstance. You really are trying to get rid of some of these ingredients that people don't want, right? Because you can make stuff taste good with your aspartame, right? So
Well, and sorry, I referenced aspartame a lot. That was a former job.
Oh, I understand. I understand. I'm just saying
that Glanbia offers, but absolutely.
Definitely not.
So no, Glanbia is definitely a all about providing better nutrition, providing healthful foods. We're talking about protein today, but we also do a lot in vitamins and minerals. We make our own flavors as well. All different ways to deliver better health. There's also a whole division of our company where we have bioactive ingredients, things that have a particular health benefit, a real in vivo benefit as far as immunity benefits or iron absorption. There's a lot of different facets to that. So Glanbia is kind of a portfolio ingredient company, is all focused around better health, better nutrition. Protein is an excellent vehicle to do that. And from a consumer awareness perspective, some of the research, the primary research we've done, what we find now is and there's good and bad to this, but protein is a signal to consumers that a product's healthy. So if we ask consumers, here's a bunch of products, do you think they're healthy or they're unhealthy, and put it on a spectrum, and you have a word like donut, they'll say it's on the unhealthy side. But if you put protein in front and say protein donut, all of a sudden it goes to the other side of the page, and consumers now think it's healthier. Now, the bad of that is, that allows for some products to carry this health halo when maybe they're not necessarily healthy just because they've been fortified with protein. But in general, I would say that this is good. Protein is a really good ingredient. People generally need to eat more of it. And what our technology enables is all the things that we were just talking about, delivering products that actually taste really good and give you those benefits of higher protein, higher fiber, lower sugar, all those different boxes that consumers today want to check.
Okay, great. So I guess we could use the protein donut as an example. So first off, there's kind of like two different ways to look at it. And one of them is we're going to give them the junk food, but at least like throw some protein in it. And then the other, which is more challenging, is we're going to take this thing that is junk food and get rid of as much of the bad stuff as possible, protein fortify it, and have it be a cleaner protein donut. So that second one, I think, is probably where a lot of us would personally like to go in the industry.
Yeah.
If we were to say, if I were to call you up and say, hey, we got a new brand, we want to make a new healthy protein donut, not just junk food with protein added, but truly a quality health protein based donut, where do we even begin? Like, do you have certain ingredients where like, oh, I have a certain protein that I would definitely use, or a certain process, or how would we kind of start the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have different ranges of proteins. Getting back to the bar example I gave, if you use the wrong type of protein for the wrong type of application, it's not that it's a bad protein or a low quality protein. It just wasn't designed to be used in a bar or a donut or a cereal or whatever it might be, respectively. So in the case of a protein donut, Glanbia actually has a new range of ingredients we just launched in the last year called OvenPro. And these are different proteins or combinations of proteins that were designed to be used in high protein baked goods. So we would build kind of our chassis for that donut around one of those OvenPro systems that we have that's going to deliver that high protein. Again, the textural experience, you're going to want to have all the things we talked about earlier, still have the browning, still have a more moist product, not have it be crumbly or dry, or certain proteins will have like a gritty or sort of sandy texture to them, not having any of that stuff. And then we'll design the rest of it around, trying to reduce the sugar, trying to put things in there that are healthier ingredients in that context, like fiber, that we've referenced earlier. And we can construct a product, that is delivering against all of those things to an extent. And that's where you have to start getting to trade-offs. So, you can only go so high in protein before you start really getting into that unedible realm. And again, it depends who's your end use consumer, right? Like someone who's
Right.
going into the gym and just wants their protein and they don't care about taste, maybe there's more leeway there in terms of taste. But typically what our scientific team, our research and development team that focuses on applications, what they're very good at is figuring out what's that red line. How high can we get in a donut or in a muffin or a cupcake or a bar or a cereal, whatever it is, when we still feel like this is a good tasting product. And once we cross that line, it's just not going to be something you really want to eat.
And that also affects the stability of it as well, correct? Like that where that lives also can say how long it'll be on shelf, and that's a huge factor as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's kind of how we would approach that, Mike. Is we would start to look in the bounds of reality of, okay, if a customer comes to us and they say, we want to make a donut that's 90% protein, well, it's going to be a pile of powder in a bag. There's like that's just not possible. So we have to set expectations with our customers in terms of the art of the possible based on what the confines of the technology and the ingredients are today, and they're continuing to improve. I would say, the amount of protein we could get into a donut today versus 5 years ago is quite a bit higher in terms of still having it taste really good. And then we have to think about some of these other trade-offs. So, one of the things that you said in your question, which really resonated with me, is kind of these two different categories, right? The junk food, using your terminology, that's better for you, versus something that's truly healthy. In that former category, we would talk about that in terms of permissible indulgence, like, in terms of a consumer construct. So I want to eat something that's junk food or, an indulgence, a sweet treat or a savory snack, whatever it is, but I don't want to feel guilty about it. So I want it to be a little bit better for me or healthier. But that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be 0 sugar and 400 grams of protein or whatever in that product. I just want it to be better for me than the full sugar, full fat, whatever alternative. That's a little bit of a different construct than the second case where the design brief is make this thing as healthy as possible. And what I would kind of pull this further in terms of these, different food forms, if we want to call them traditionally junk food that now have been fortified with high protein or with less sugar or more fiber or both, is there's a lot of occasions. And what I mean by occasions is like, when are you eating these things? You eating it in the morning, on your way to work? Are you trying to eat in the evening when you're watching something streaming on TV? And what's your need state? So why are you eating it? Are you trying to get your protein up to a certain number? Again, is it more that permissible indulgence piece? And what we're finding is the traditional food forms, even though they're still growing, so, you're ready to drink protein beverages like the shakes, your ready to mix, and your bars. Those would be kind of the three core categories for protein supplementation historically. Those don't serve all of those different occasions and need states. And there's opportunity to create, some of the more emerging newer food forms like your protein chips or your protein cereals or your protein baked goods, your donuts, that type of stuff, that the consumer is going to eat at a different time of day for a different reason. And that's where there's a lot of white space in terms of innovation right now, because there's a lot of occasions and need states that are really underserved right now based on, the products that are out in the market. And that's what we really get excited about, and where we focus our design of these different ingredient systems, like I referenced OvenPro, was specifically developed for baked goods, because we feel like that food form can serve some of these occasions and need states that aren't being served by some of these, other more traditional protein products.
Yeah, thanks. I was just looking at the OvenPro page. It's hilarious because I've been trolling your website for well over a year more and never saw any of these pages. So we'll have to link to them in the show notes. But so you have, and the OvenPro is kind of a platform or series. We have OvenPro bread and bread zero net carb, OvenPro cake, and then OvenPro quick bread. So if that gives, maybe you can go through a couple of the different examples. I'm assuming like for the donut, you'd want to use OvenPro cake, but I'm not sure what quick bread is either, but if you could.
Yeah. No, I am a food scientist, but I'm certainly not a bakery scientist. I mean, that's its whole other, area. So I know, there's a book somewhere that would define quick breads as a category of baked goods, and it would define exactly what those are. I'm probably not intelligent enough to give you really good examples on
that's
one
cool.
the other, but those are different buckets of kind of types of baked goods, your breads versus your muffins versus your cakes versus things like cookies. And what we've tried to do is design ranges of proteins that are going to work in those different core applications. Mm-hmm. So if a baker is saying, look, I'm trying to do a high protein bread, we're going to have a different protein we would select for that versus someone who's trying to do, say, a high protein cookie or a high protein muffin.
Okay, so for the brands that are actually listening to this, I guess the $1 million question is, when do we contact you versus just contact a contract manufacturer? I mean, the way you're speaking about this and know your stuff so well, I'm almost thinking that I want to just go to you first and then find the right ingredients to use and then go to a contract manufacturer. I'm not sure if you would manufacture it yourself, if it's a big enough opportunity. Like, who does what, and are you opening the floor for like people just to contact Glanbia directly without going through a manufacturer yet?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great that you bring that up, Mike, because that is one of the things I would say that differentiates Glanbia. We spend just as much time in R&D in terms of designing the next great cool protein that can do something novel as we do taking that protein and using it in a finished application. And that would be called applications. You're applying an ingredient to a finished application. So we have a huge applications team. We have labs and pilot plants, all over the world. And we do a lot of development on behalf of our customers. And this is anywhere from startups to, the biggest CPGs in the world. They come to us with a brief. We want to develop this donut or this cereal or this bar. We want it to have this much protein, this much sugar. These ingredients are in scope. These ingredients are out of scope. And then we will develop a recipe for them in our lab. We actually invite our customers to come to our labs and work with us side by side in order to do that. Then, to your point, we're not a co-manufacturer. We're just an ingredient house. We will then can help be the linkage to those co-manufacturers, because at the end of the day, the co-man is typically the one that is our customer that's placing the order for the ingredients. So we already work with a lot of these co-mans in these different application areas, and we can link our brand that we're working with on this formula to the appropriate co-man that matches their scale, their needs, the product type, etc. Or in some cases, some companies self-manufacture, and that's great. Or they already have a preferred co-man partner they work with, which is great. And we also work with co-mans as well, because to your point, they do a lot of development in-house. So we have really close relationships with a lot of co-mans that would be very familiar with our ingredients. We would go and train them on Protein 101 type of stuff, or we might do that same type of collaborative approach with co-mans on behalf of some of the brands they're working with. So absolutely, anyone that wants to work with us in any capacity along that value chain, we're certainly open to that. But I would say at the end of the day, like especially in the protein space, a lot of companies, are much more, I would say, branding companies than manufacturers. So they know the consumer and the market and how to get the product in the market. They run circles around us and that, but they may not have the expertise in the protein. What's the right protein to use? How do we put this formula together? And that's where I think we really shine. I was talking to someone the other day about this, that because we have such deep applications expertise, we know a lot about ingredients we don't even make, like fiber, for example. I was saying that, our applications team probably knows almost just as much about fiber as they do about protein, because they're using fiber alongside our protein in almost every application we make. So we can kind of provide this full service for the brands that we work with, where they can come to us with a concept or an idea, and we can kind of make it into a reality for them.
I just want to say I have already decided what I want our next trip to be. I want to go to one of your applications labs, and I want to sit down and make something fun together. I can't believe we did not know that this is a possibility until now. That sounds awesome. I think more people need to know that you do that, because I think there are a lot of people that are looking at functional foods and don't know where to go. And to work directly with you guys, if you guys already have the expertise, it makes total sense. You're making the ingredients. Why wouldn't we go to you for that kind of innovation?
Absolutely. And that we really encourage that, if we're ever going in for, say, a sales call to a customer, when we win is when the customer said, yeah, I want to come to one of your labs and work with your scientists on the bench. That's how we know we're going to get a great outcome. It's not just about the expertise, but also speed to market is critical these days. And if we're doing a little bit of a back and forth, maybe we're prototyping for them, but we're sending it, in the mail, and then we get some feedback, and it can take 6 weeks. It can take 12 weeks from concept to finished product. If customers come to our labs, we can do it in 2 days. And then they're leaving with a finished concept, a finished product. Everybody's happy. It really takes that development cycle down significantly and allows them to be in market a lot faster.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like you have kind of a few options. You get a consultant who can work with both sides, or you go straight to the co-man, or you go straight to you. And it seems like if someone's willing to actually do the legwork and everything, working directly with you makes a lot of sense. Also, you're not gonna start formulating with an ingredient that you don't have in stock, because I know stock is probably something we should talk about. So unless you have anything more to say about that, I think contacting you makes a ton of sense in terms of working with development and getting something new and unique out that's going to work. And then you could kind of take your pick of the contract manufacturers. It seems that would make sense. So one thing that I had heard at supply side this year is that because of the GLP-1 market, there is either like less cheese being consumed, or the growth of cheese maybe is a little bit lower, which is leading to less production of whey, which is then while simultaneously the whey protein demand is increasing. Yeah. So we have like less production growth, but more growth in the actual demand. And finally that leads us to these crazy increases in whey protein prices. We're basically like, we're not going to be seeing 5 pounds of protein tubs that much longer, is kind of like where things are looking. So with all that said, like, first off, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's kind of what you're seeing in the dairy space, but what are you doing to combat that? Like, are you, short of breeding more cows and everything, what are you doing in terms of protein alternatives? And kind of give us the layout of everything I just kind of mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I think you got it, mostly right there. I wouldn't say that, cheese consumption is declining. It still grows, but, it's a huge high volume category. It's a very established category. So, the cheese growth rate is typically 2 or 3% a year. Whereas what we're seeing in these high protein categories is, double digits, and some category to category could be multiple times over, but just the growth rate is exceeding the capacity. And that's part of the dynamic. It's also, when we build a factory, they're massive. They don't get built overnight. There's a lot of capital that goes into them. So, folks are expanding, but it is going to take some time for the production to catch up with the demand. So we have seen unprecedented high whey prices, particularly on the isolate end of the spectrum. That would be your 90% protein or higher, and concentrates as well, which can be anywhere from 34 to 80%. But typically in the sports nutrition context, concentrates are 80% or above. The prices on those have been creeping up to almost record levels as well in the last, say, 6 to 12 months. So there's definitely been a squeeze on supply. And circling back to what we talked about kind of at the onset, I do believe that, GLP-1s were kind of throwing gasoline onto a fire that was already burning pretty bright, that was driving a lot of that. So to answer your question in terms of what are we doing, I would say a couple things. We're aggressively looking to find ways to, squeeze more blood out of the turnip, so to speak, in terms of, finding more solids, making our plants run more efficiently, expanding in areas where we can expand, and not just us, but a lot of other companies are trying to also valorize or functionalize, maybe lower protein streams. So it doesn't always have to be about isolates. Maybe some of the lower protein whey ingredients can have some really interesting functionality, some really good taste, all those things that we've been talking about earlier. And when there was plenty available and there was a menu to select, everyone wanted isolate, right? Because it was the highest in concentration. But that doesn't mean you can't get great protein and a great whey source from concentrates that have, a little bit less protein in there and still get to that end product outcome. The other thing I would say about Glanbia, and particularly the space that I sit in functional proteins, is we're kind of protein agnostic. Like we don't just make whey. I mean, we're one of the largest producers of whey in the world. So that is a core product of ours. But, we market milk proteins, plant proteins as well. We have, pea proteins that have been designed to be used in bar applications, and extruded applications, which are kind of the puffed, snacks or cereals. When I say extrusion, that's what I mean. OvenPro, which we mentioned, the product that we just launched this year that's doing extremely well, is actually a combination of a wheat protein and a milk protein that we make. So there are ways to get at protein from a lot of different sources, and we're kind of agnostic to what the source is. We just want to make sure we're still able to deliver, that taste, that functionality, and that high protein load in those applications, regardless of if it's coming from a whey protein isolate or a wheat protein or, one of these other sources.
Can you take us through some of the wheat protein? Is that basically like a high gluten type of application, or is it something else?
Yeah. I mean, typically, gluten is a protein. I mean, just like with anything else, with when you say whey protein, in lay terms, we would think of that as one thing, but it's a whole class of proteins, right? And when you talk about milk proteins, that is any protein that comes out of milk. There are two types of protein in dairy as far as classes of protein. You have your caseins and your wheys, and when they're combined together, that's what a milk protein would be. But those aren't just one thing, right? So there's a lot of different types of whey protein. Some of them are, a majority, or higher. Yeah, like beta-lac and, and alpha-lac. But you've got, IgGs and lactoferrin and all of these, little things in there as well. And, the same thing would be true in plant-based proteins as well. So, in a wheat protein, you're going to have different fractions that are going to do different things. And one thing that Glanbia is very good at is understanding kind of the proteins down to the basic chemistry level. And then we have these platforms where we can process or modify the functionality of these proteins and get them to deliver a certain taste or texture that we're looking for by doing some of that additional processing. So, getting into, we're a dairy company at our heart. We started as a cooperative out of Ireland. That's what our heritage is, But, more recently, I'd say within the last decade and a half, we've gotten into a lot of these other protein sources. And the way that we've been able to do that is we've taken what we've learned about how dairy functions, and then we've taken those same processing proprietary know-how that we have and just applied them to other raw sources of protein, whether it be pea or wheat or one of these other protein forms. And that allows us to deliver that texture, that functionality, whatever we're looking for in those applications. So when I say I represent functional proteins for Glanbia, that's across a wide variety of sources, not just dairy proteins.
Okay, thanks. And so, yeah, I see on the OvenPro page, it does mention one of the bullet points is similar functionality of wheat flour. So I'm not sure. And OvenPro might not have any wheat in it. I'm not sure, but either way, are you trying to? Can wheat protein be used to help replace wheat flour, or are these two completely different worlds?
No,
really?
So yeah, there's different products within that range, and I think the one you're referencing was meant to be sort of a drop-in one for flour, but it's higher protein. So the intention of that product was to basically be able to make higher protein and lower carb breads. So at a manufacturing level, instead of using 1 kilo or whatever of flour, put 1 kilo of OvenPro in. We have other OvenPro ingredients which are really meant to be more for fortification versus replacing flour. Now you'd still have to pull some flour out, getting back to the mass balance thing we talked about. But there's a whole range of different ingredients there that will have different purposes depending on what the target is and what the end use application is.
Excellent. Okay, so getting back to some basic application things, are there any products out there that you wish existed that don't exist, or that you would like us to do, or not us, but if we were to have a fun collab, or that you would like someone to kind of create? Is anything out there? In the past, we've talked about cool flavors that no one's doing. Do you have anything that you personally wish was out there?
As far as a finished product, not an ingredient?
Yeah. Or capabilities of Glanbias that are not being utilized enough by the market, for instance, anything like that.
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, this is a pretty broad brush, but things like OvenPro and our pea protein range, our extruded products, for puff snacks, for cereals, these are newer to us, and those are also still pretty nascent categories as far as high protein. So those are areas that I'd love to see more adoption of. But that's pretty broad to say high protein baked goods. That could be a lot of different things, right? I think those would probably be what's top of mind to me. And we could go deep in terms of what types of baked goods I would think would be better. But the other, I guess this is a little bit of a kind of a pet idea I had. The first time I went to, or one of the first times I went to Japan. I saw they had in an ice cream cooler these squeeze pouches with ice cream in them. So think about the little applesauce pouches you might see a toddler squeezing, like that, but filled with ice cream. And I thought, man, if I was hot and leaving the gym and I could grab a frozen squeeze pouch that had 20 grams of whey protein in it, and it was a high protein kind of ice cream that's cold, that would be pretty awesome. And that's not just a product innovation, but also a packaging innovation, I would say.
Interesting. We actually know people who could do the pouches. So that's a great idea. That could be done. Okay, let's say we were going to approach that. What proteins from Glanbia would you be suggesting? How do you obviously you don't need the right answer, but how would you first approach that in order to make this work, knowing that we have a manufacturer who does pouches?
Right. So we'd have to understand from the manufacturer, that's a little bit of an out there space for us. So we'd have to understand from the manufacturer things like viscosity, how is it going to pump through their system? We would have to understand, what type of temperature processes they're using. So, proteins will denature, and what that means is they just change their shape. They kind of unravel. And once you've denatured a protein, you can't renature it. I don't even know if that's a word. I think I just made that up. But once you've kind of broken the structure of a protein, you can't put it back together. So one of the ways proteins will denature is at higher temperatures. And, dairy proteins can be kind of sensitive to temperature depending on whether you're talking about a milk protein or a whey protein, they have different sensitivities to temperature. But we need to really understand their process in terms of how they're already, running their pouching lines, so that we could try to design the system and the formula so the proteins would survive and still have the right temperature. And the viscosity is really important in those types of systems, because if you're pumping it, through lines, it can't just turn into a block or a mass, and clog everything up, right? It's still got to stay flowable. So that would be one piece we'd have to look at. And then we would have to be looking at the kind of freeze thaw conditions and the viscosity in the pouch to make sure that it's actually squeezable, those types of things, as well as the normal design principles we would look at, like how much protein do we want to have, how much sugar is acceptable, what ingredients are in scope, can we use some of those sugar, alcohol, dirtier ingredients, or does it have to be fiber? Are artificial sweeteners in scope? Are we only using stevia or monk fruit, those natural sweeteners in this formula? So we'd also have to have kind of a design brief around that. And the nutritional profile, and then really get into the weeds with the manufacturer around those different processing conditions.
Awesome. Okay, because like on the back end, we've been kind of kicking around what are the different fun collab ideas we're going to do in 2026. There's a couple trade shows. That idea might be a heavy lift, but if everyone wants to play along and do it, I think that could be something we might want to try.
We're dropping like flies. This is not good.
Perfect. Yeah, because behind the scenes, we've been kicking around what collab ideas we want to do in 2026 for a couple key trade shows, and if we do know someone who could do the pouches, and so it's definitely a bit of a heavy lift. But if Glanbia wants to possibly explore this, then I think that could be a fun one for some of these hotter summer shows. So we'll have to take that one offline. That's actually a great idea. So I appreciate it. But yeah, of course, we have to see if it's even feasible from, like you said, viscosity and all the application standpoints.
And absolutely. That one's kind of a little bit more of my own pipe dream, I've had for years. And again, as someone who goes to the gym, and I'm one of those people, when I come out of the gym, I look like I jumped into a swimming pool. So, the idea of having something frozen is pretty great for me. But something that could be much more low-hanging fruit would be, the type of applications, which again, I still see as kind of nascent but fast growing categories, those high protein baked goods, something like a high protein brownie, a high protein donut, or something on the extruded snack or cereal side. Those are areas that we're really deep into these days, where the categories are growing pretty exponentially, but still haven't fully matured in the same way that ready to mix beverages or, bars have, I would say.
I'm obsessed with this idea. We'll have to take that offline.
We got to talk about this. Yeah. It could be fun. Awesome. Okay. Well, I've gotten a lot out of this. Like, Brad, I think you're welcome to come back anytime. We'll get James back in next time or whatever. But you have a ton of information. I think a lot of people are going, once they listen to this, they're going to realize that it's probably a good idea to call Glanbia first and foremost when they have a pretty wild idea, because if the ingredients can support it, then you might have some runway to do it. So I think it's
absolutely.
This has been fun. Are there any other things you want to add? Like, do we completely miss anything?
We missed GLP. I wanted to bring it to GLP at some point, because it seemed like GLP is kind of throwing gasoline on the fire of everything we talked about. It seems like everything that we talked about, it just only burns brighter with the introduction of GLP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I would say it's tied to a lot of what we discussed, Ben, in that, if I get back to what we were talking about, need states and occasions. So what the data is showing us, and again, James can speak to this in a lot more detail than I can, but GLP-1 consumers are eating less in general, but what they are eating, they're needing and being told by their doctors to consume more protein in the less that they're eating, if that makes sense. So what that means is, you're not, as that type of consumer, or any type of consumer, frankly, you're not just going to want to be eating protein bars all day or shakes, right? There's a time and place for that. Maybe you want to have one protein bar or two, and maybe have a shake for lunch. But we need to have these other food forms that serve these other eating occasions that are still going to deliver high protein, great taste, lower sugar, higher fiber, all of that good stuff. So I think that topic is just as relevant for a GLP-1 consumer as it is for a mainstream consumer. The dynamics are a little bit different, but we're seeing a number of those. And another piece that I thought was fascinating in the data that James had from our primary research is there's kind of different types of GLP-1 consumers as well. We're starting to see emerging. Some that are just on it for a short period of time and then drop off it. Some that are on it for a long period of time because of a chronic health condition. Whereas, the former category might be someone that's just really interested in more just weight loss, but, not because of chronic obesity or being diabetic, something as far as more of a chronic health condition. And then there's, kind of a cohort that are sort of off and on it. And I don't think we know enough yet as an industry to think about, well, what different types of products should we be tailoring for those different cohorts? But I thought that was fascinating. We shouldn't be thinking about, just like any type of consumer set, we shouldn't be thinking about GLP consumers as just one thing. There's a lot of different kind of shades of GLP-1 consumers that I think are going to emerge.
Cool. That's really interesting. All right.
That's insightful. Yeah.
We'll see. I like those types of predictions on these podcasts because we can always go back and see later. So
yeah. Well, and again, James has data supporting that. I just think it's going to continue. And again, that's just my opinion.
Makes
But
sense.
the other thing that really struck me in that data is the number of GLP-1 consumers already. It's in the millions. It was staggering to me. How many there are, and the growth rates they're projecting are also pretty staggering in terms of how many more there will be. I believe, I've read that some of the pharma companies are working on, ingestible forms, pill forms. And I would imagine there's a number of consumers out there that are a little bit, hesitant about injecting themselves. But as soon as a pill comes, maybe that's going to be a game changer. And presumably the cost is going to come way down as well.
Yeah,
So,
I've talked on a couple panels over the last year, and they keep bringing up GLPs. And I think the thing that I keep feeling when I search my thoughts for preparing for these things is the second it becomes ingestible oral, like it's like off to the races. Because if there's already millions of people injecting it, I know there's a ton of people that injecting is a hurdle to them. So when it gets to that point, I mean, RIP the weight management, like dietary supplement market at that point. Because if you can go to your doctor and get a quote unquote fat burner pill from a pharmacy, as opposed to having to go to a retail store and find a brand and decide which one's going to work for you, whatever. If you can just go get it from your doctor, I think so many people are going to be so all about that. It's really interesting. I'm curious to see the groups of them. I think one of the most fascinating things that I've noticed also is like the real-time release of data about these drugs. If you go on Reddit, there are entire communities of people that are on the clinical study. I find this fascinating that participants in a clinical study are posting about it online. I think last week there was a big new study on Retta, pretty much one of the newer, like exciting ones that has some other topics to be discussed, like the GLP-3 version. And the users of that new trial are like on the internet explaining like the benefits that they found in the clinical trial. I mean, it's fascinatingly a new frontier that we're kind of seeing what's going to happen live. And like this podcast itself, like we're just kind of noticing what's occurring in the community and in the purchasing patterns. It's all kind of happening live, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, it's very heavily tied to protein, because that's, something that entire consumer set is being told or knows that as I'm doing this, I also need to consume more protein.
Yeah. For so long, supplements were not a focus for doctors. They kind of stayed away from it. And I think not that they're just promoting protein powder, but like the idea of looking into like functional powders and foods and beverages is not something that doctors were popularly recommending over the last 10 years, I feel. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
For demand.
And again, tying it back, I think what we're doing, what, a lot of other people in the industry are doing, who are either manufacturing protein or making finished goods, are just making it a lot easier to get that additional protein, because the products taste good. there's a lot of different formats. There's a lot of different flavors. There's a lot of different types. You're not just in a box
Yeah,
only being able to make a shake. You have a lot more choice, and that choice tastes really good.
absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we've pretty much exhausted this topic. This has been really informative. Are there any like places that you'd want to send people to look up these topics or Glanbia? Like where can we find you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, no, our website, Mike was referencing, Glanbia.com, that can link you pretty much anywhere you'd want to go and learn about our company. We have a lot of great resources on there. We're also, pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So I would encourage folks to follow Glanbia Nutritionals, which is, the legacy ingredients division. Does a lot of posting. We do a lot of educational webinars, things that I've been talking about as far as our primary research, our technical data. And certainly feel free to reach out through the website, as Mike mentioned. If there's a company out there that's looking to launch a new product or protein fortify a product that they already have, and they're looking for an expert that knows the right proteins to use and knows the right applications, certainly reach out to us in any one of those channels, and we'd love the opportunity to work with you.
Awesome.
Excellent. And cool if we link your LinkedIn in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we'll send people over there, and thank you so much for joining us, Brad. This has been awesome. We're going to take a few things offline. I want to see if we could run with some sort of fun little collab type marketing type idea in 2026. We will to be determined for now.
No, it was great working with you on the beverage. We did earlier this year, and again, really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.